Welcome back to the KRUSE Elite Podcast. What's up, Tony?
Happy Monday, Taylor.
Yes, happy Monday.
So I've been working on my Indian club figure eights.
Nice.
I always forget what they're called. I'm terrible at remembering the names of things.
Yeah, I don't think I know the original names of that stuff, but basically I call them mills.
Yeah, mills. That sounds right to me. I'm sure that there's like an ancient term
Right.
from South Asia or Persia or wherever they originate. But yeah, I've been practicing and I feel like I'm getting closer. Like, you know how sometimes you feel like you're practicing and like it doesn't get better, and then one day it's just like, oh, that was a marked improvement.
Totally.
But yeah, I think part of it is counting. So like I'll count on one side, like 1 for the circle in front of my face, 2 for the circle behind me when I'm doing it alone, and then I'll do 2 for the circle in front of me with my left hand and 1 so that they sync up when they're going simultaneously. And I think that that's helping. I'm not sure.
You know what helps me, and this doesn't help everybody. I think this can mess some people up, but I actually like seeing myself working in the mirror. I feel like it gives me good feedback. So I actually have a mirror pretty close to my little gym space, and sometimes I'll use it.
Yeah. All right. That's a good tip. I have a mirror here, but I'm in a basement, and when I'm swinging these things, I have to be mindful of like ducting, and so I can be in like only one very specific orientation to do this movement. But that's a good point, because sometimes I feel like I'll even just like lose the motion behind my head.
Yeah.
Like I won't actually do the full loop. So yeah, getting some visual feedback.
Yep.
Would be
And
helpful.
I film myself doing stuff too occasionally. You know, I'll just set up my camera, film it, and then play it back. And that can give you a lot of feedback too. And it's sometimes a little easier for people than seeing yourself in the mirror
in real time.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, something to try. Are you working on any new skills right now?
No, not really. I'm just checking in. You know, I'm especially with the club stuff. Like I pretty much just check in with the same fundamentals all the time. And then occasionally I'll just like make stuff up just for fun. Like it's almost like I'm flowing several of the moves together, just kind of seeing what can do that, like how to transition from one to another is kind of fun.
Yeah.
But you know what the problem is, man? When I start exploring like that, I end up using my workout time for all exploration. And then I'm like, darn it. Like I didn't even do these other things.
Right.
You know, so it's like, because time is tough at the moment. But yeah, I like to check in. Yep. I like to check in with that stuff. And it still is one of my favorite tools for sure, especially the steel clubs. I've been using those a bit lately.
Yeah. I bet there's a way to like structure it where it's like, okay, every 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 workouts, I'll just play.
Right.
And then I'll get back to my, my medicine for the other times or whatever.
Yep.
But yeah, play is, I think, a valuable commodity.
It is.
These times,
It absolutely is. And usually people, I think, have the opposite problem. They get a little bit too rigid and structured. And they don't really get the play time, because play for a lot of people takes, time and effort. A lot of people don't want to do that part, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. No, when I'm doing like a kind of more like free form, just playful kind of stuff like that, it's either the clubs or I've got this like 10-pound medicine ball. It's like a basketball, but it's a medicine ball, right? And I'll like do stuff where I like toss it and then catch it and squat, or like roll with it, or I just do weird stuff. And then since I've been working with you, I've started rolling around more.
Nice.
Just not every time, but every once in a while, it's just like, okay, I'm going to try to do some different rolls and get more fluid with it,
That's great. That's great. I was thinking about the other day, because I brought my daughter to the playground nearby. I did like a dad workout yesterday. It was basically at the playground while she's kind of running around doing all these different things. I would do like an occasional set of pull-ups or dips or hanging leg raise. And I did them on a ladder. So, it was nothing wild. I'd be like, start at, first set, 10 dips. A couple minutes later, second set, 9 dips. work down to 1.
Mm-hmm.
I did that with pull-ups from I think I went 8 to 1. Dips, I did 10 to 1. Hanging leg raise, I did 8 to 1.
Yeah, man.
I'm
Nice.
sore today from that.
I was going to say, that's some volume.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like you're doing that much in the moment. It does, which I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like. But yeah, it's an effective dad workout right there. But I was thinking about how useful obstacle course kind of play is. We actually talk about that too through the neuro lens sometimes. But yeah, just kind of it's almost like you're choosing new options, you're choosing different options, you're trying to figure things out. It's kind of like problem solving with movement
Mm-hmm.
skills. There's not really a right or a wrong, but the goal is to get from point A to point B. That's super valuable, and that stuff is gone missing from fitness.
So is there like a strong cortical activation there
There
in
certainly is.
addition to
Yeah,
all of like the
yeah, there
vestibular
certainly
and
is.
proprioceptive stuff going on?
I think so. Yeah, it's. I mean, it would be such a blend of things, right? Such a blend. But we also talk a lot about obstacle course stuff involving the thalamus. Remember, we talked about the thalamus as the switchboard operator. We were talking about it as far as thalamic conditioning goes with things that are
Mm-hmm.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that obstacle course stuff kind of fits in there too. Yeah, there's a lot of areas, but it's such a healthy thing to do. And if you think about it, it's so real world, like problem solving using your
Yeah.
body. It's not just up, down, left, right, push, pull.
So Teddy Roosevelt, I forget if I was reading his memoir or a biography about him. I
Yeah.
forget. But apparently he would play a game with his brothers and his dad when he was a kid. And the game was we would have to go from point A to point B in a straight line no matter what.
Hmm.
And so maybe I've said this on the podcast before, I don't remember. But it's like if there's a tree in the way, like you cannot walk around the tree. If there's a house in the way, you cannot walk around the house. And so it seems like quite a challenge sometimes to just go from one place to another without the option of going around it. You'd have to
Totally.
go
And
over everything.
you want to know what else I really like? And you can try this in you can add this to your little rolling training. Basically, you could do fun stuff like getting up and down off the floor,
Mm-hmm.
but for example, I'll sometimes say to people, I want you to get up and down off the floor over and over and over again for 1 minute, but you have to use a different strategy every single time,
Mm.
which is kind of neat. And then we also play some fun ones where it's like, I want you to get up and down off the ground, but you can't use your right arm. And then you can't use your left arm. And then you can kind of, no arms. And you can even go, you can't use your right leg. It's really,
It becomes a
really
puzzle.
fun.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. That's really
exactly.
interesting.
Really,
Yeah.
really good thing to just kind of add into even if you only have a few minutes, that could be part of a warm up little skills session. I think that stuff goes a long way.
Yeah. I could see some transference to jujitsu as well.
Yeah.
And just like being able to get up in different ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, sometimes when I use my Indian clubs, I kind of notice a little bit of like carpal tunnel
Oh, really?
tightness or tingling. And it's usually because, I'm sitting at the computer
A
for
lot.
long hours of the day, or even worse, if I'm holding my phone and looking at my phone for a long time, I notice that can kind of cause it to flare up. So I wanted to talk about kind of these repetitive use or repetitive motion. There's a lot of words: repetitive strain,
Yep.
injury, symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just get your take on them, both from what's going on when people talk about these injuries and
Yeah.
what are maybe some misconceptions about
Sure.
this stuff. And then also, what are some practical things we can do with applied neurology that might provide some relief, right?
Nice. Nice. Yeah. I think I've laughed and told you this before, but the thing that I'm asked about most in DMs and stuff is tennis elbow and golfer's elbow.
Mm.
I get DMs about that almost every single day. People want to know. And it's become this sort of inside joke to those who actually follow enough to pick up on the inside joke. But I'll put stuff in the stories occasionally, and I'm making like a, like a pissed off face. And I'll be like, if you ask me about tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, I refuse to speak to you ever again. Like, I do this every once in a while, and definitely certain people keep picking up on it. And they kind of laugh back with me, and other people are confused. They're like, why don't you want to talk to me about this? But I get asked about those two things constantly. And people really struggle with the tennis elbow, golfer's elbow kind of issues. Yeah, it's interesting, and I think there's things I can share, tools that I think we can apply there. A lot of people definitely are, not sure what to do because the pain is pretty chronic and lasts a long time, and it starts to feel like it becomes an overwhelming thing because it seems like nothing actually helps it. But yeah, we should go over some stuff that can help folks with those two particular issues. But you want to know how I kind of want to begin this?
Okay.
Is I want to I kind of want to immediately do a little bit of like debunking almost, if you want to call it that. The idea of calling these tendon issues, because if we're talking about repetitive motion injury or repetitive motion issues or strain, tendon issues are probably what people are most familiar with. Of course, we have other types of repetitive motion type injury like stress fractures and things like that. But I think typically our conversations probably always go to tendons. I actually don't like the terminology repetitive motion injury or repetitive motion issue at all. It's just not a good description of what's probably happening in terms of why a person has developed the issues, because repetitive motion implies that you're moving too much, and there's no such thing as moving too much, right? But there is such thing as moving too much, or let's say too little, on an unhealthy foundation. So to say that you have tennis elbow because you play too much tennis is kind of like, well, are you saying that your body can't play tennis? Like, just because you keep hitting this, backhand or whatever, and you're using your forearm muscles, like your tendons are inflamed now from that? You play tennis how many times a week? Some people would say like, I don't even average playing once a week, but I still have tennis elbow. Or some people would say, oh, I play every day, right? And it's just like people have different stories about their frequency of playing. And then you have people that in my DMs are laughing. They're like, I have tennis elbow, I don't play tennis. It's like very, very odd, right? And that's part of the reason why people are so confused. But there's no such thing as like moving too much, because that's what we are designed to do. But there is such thing as moving too much or too little if we're thinking of, if we consider that there's foundational things that are off, right? But your body can handle it, right? If you're conditioned properly and if you are healthy enough. And I think our conversation probably at some point is going to talk about some of the health things, because interestingly enough, over the years of just observation, just meeting people, talking to them, working with clients, taking their history, I was thinking about this deeply before our podcast, and I could not think of a single client ever. And I've had a lot of folks mention tendon issues. Couldn't think of a single client ever that had a tendon problem that they were calling a repetitive use injury, like a tennis elbow or something, that didn't have some kind of metabolic concern. So, yeah, the person might say, hey, I've got tennis elbow, I play tennis, or I work with my hands a lot, or whatever. But through working with them, I would always find out that they needed nutritional support, or they were showing signs of some sort of metabolic imbalance, and they had breathing, pattern dysfunction, and, perhaps they had a history of things that could interrupt energy uptake, right, from their food. whether, gut issues, hormonal things, whatever the case might be. And I just found it interesting, right? It's like I'm sort of just thinking about all these people.
Hmm.
And it's been very clear to me over the years that very few people get a tendon issue just from overtraining. It's people. I think it happens,
Hmm.
but realistically, when they develop tendon issues that are chronic over time, there's more at play. There's more going on for sure. So,
Fascinating.
for what it's worth, yeah, I mean that's just observation and just talking to people. And then so I did search that, because it used to be that the searchability of things has become so incredible. It's like using AI to get summaries and stuff on research and everything. It's wild. Really good for a guy like me, because I really don't intend on going deep into the literature and trying to find this stuff. I was searching before our podcast here, like simple stuff like can tendon issues. I forget exactly the search terms, but I was basically like, can tendon issues be present because of metabolic concerns? And tons of stuff came up, and I was like, whoa, that's awesome. It never really used to be like that. I feel like I wasn't able to find stuff like that, but it went on to give me quite a few research articles on metabolic syndromes and the correlation to different tendon issues. And then they, just kind of summarize whether it was like diabetic issues or just unstable blood sugar. And they had a whole list of different metabolic concerns, saying these are things that commonly lead to what essentially was described as a reduced quality in tendons. They said stiffness, they said inflammatory conditions of tendons, they talked about weakness of tendons, but it was just interesting to actually see that, because it really matches with what I feel like I have observed over the years. But I wasn't necessarily able to be like, hey, other resources are pointing to this too,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when there's multiple variables at play, as there often are, right?
Right.
Because even in my presentation of this, as I experience it, I attributed the way that I'm sitting at a desk working at a computer to be causal, right?
Right.
And that's my experience, right? But
Yep.
that does not preclude that there's also metabolic or inflammatory or gut or
Right.
these other more global systemic issues, right? That could
Right.
be leading to that. And then this is the thing that pushes me over, right?
Exactly. And then yes, for sure. And then also in the case, like kind of what you're describing, with more of like a carpal tunnel thing, which might, it may be involving, like the median nerve, for example. There could be other levels to that, right? If we look at the 8 levels and start talking neuro. But then also disuse. Like a lot of times people do get they have these tendon complaints. And one of the things that they tell you is, well, it's not that I move too much, it's that I move too little, but I'm sustaining a specific position for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like you're doing isometrics, very, very low grade isometrics, and eventually that becomes threatening. So there's definitely different ways to look at this kind of thing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's important, if you're, for our listeners, if they've been on the hunt for a long time trying to find solutions to tendon issues, it's important to look at the whole picture. It's very easy to get distracted by an elbow that hurts,
Right.
or a wrist that hurts. I mean, we all get seduced by that, and we all fall victim to wanting to chase pain. Like, my elbow hurts, it must be an elbow problem. But I mean, anyone who knows even a little bit about health and the human body, it's really just an ecosystem. Every system is working together. No system works alone. I mean, it really can't be as simple as elbow pain, elbow problem every time. So we got to look at so many other layers to it. And it's, that metabolic one's an important one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it is a metabolic issue, it does not mean that we cannot begin to affect it in a positive way with the tools that we have. Right. I'm a kind of a case of that. I mean, described somewhat recently in a podcast my issue that I had over last summer into the fall with like sciatic pain.
Mm-hmm.
It was so easy for me to just think I must have an entrapment. Like every single feeling I had was saying entrapment. Just something's going on. Maybe it's my piriformis. I don't know. Maybe it's this, that, the other thing. And nothing was helping until I started making progress on the metabolic component of that,
Mm-hmm.
which was gut health. Then all of my neuro drills started working. So by finding kind of the largest threat and beginning to knock it out a little bit, that was enough to empty the threat bucket to a certain degree, where now other things that I was bringing in, other tools, then started to help. And that is a lot of the time what it's like for me working with a client. If they have long-standing chronic issues, we have to find out some of the larger threats, start approaching them, addressing them in whatever way is necessary, and even small shifts in those areas can then allow us to find entry points easier with some of the tools that we have, which then ultimately everything sort of starts working together. There's like a snowball effect as you start to apply the right drills. Actually, I was talking to a student of ours recently who's very active in our community. And it was kind of a cool interaction because she was saying that over maybe a year ago, she had watched one of my member calls and we were talking about tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, and tendon issues. And I was just sharing some ideas like we are now. And she had asked me about a specific client after that call. And because the call resonated with her, and she was like, I've got this client with this chronic tendon issues. What do you think, I should do? How should I start? And she gave me the history. And I was like, you know what? That history you're giving me makes me think there's some sort of significant metabolic threat. And I think you can still use A, B, C tools, but take more history, get to know them, see what they tell you. You might find out more about this case. Well, a year later, recently, she messaged me because she had gone back to that same call to review it. And she had forgot that she had commented and wrote to me about this specific client.
Mm.
And that client had since returned to work with her. And this particular student of ours is really kicking butt in the course. I mean, in that amount of time, what she has learned has been outstanding. And so she's thinking completely different. This woman came back to work with her. She took a history again, started testing, and she immediately thought, this doesn't seem right. We have to get you. She took a history and found out that at least something that the client said to her triggered her thinking around the fact that she might have mold exposure. And she had experience with that herself. So she's not a stranger to that. She knows kind of the symptoms and everything. So anyways, she referred the lady out to get testing for exposure to mold. And the workup that the lady got back had the worst mycotoxins. I'm not saying I don't know if I'm saying it perfectly right, but anyways, the lady's report said she had the worst mold exposure, or my student had said this woman had the worst mold exposure she'd ever seen on paper. So there you go. And she had chronic inflammatory conditions all over her body that were presenting as tendon problems.
Mm-hmm.
So our student was laughing and I think proud of herself at the same time. And she was like, I can't believe I totally forgot I even mentioned this case to you. Back then, she goes, when you said that to me, it went over my head. Like I wasn't really sure what the connection would be. She said, now I picked up on it instantly. And here we are. I get a second chance with this client because the lady had left for a bit. I get a second chance with this client. And now already we're on a better path. So that was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Knowing that so many people actually have these underlying things going on when they have these tendon issues.
So one of the things we talk about with like fuel problems, which is kind of shorthand for metabolic issues, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that you might be playing whack-a-mole with pain or problems, right?
Big
like
time.
Today it's my wrist, but tomorrow it's my hip or my back. And then I have neck pain here. And so it's like by trying to attack the local problem with pain, you're sort of missing the global problem of metabolism.
Right.
But what about the person where it's like it only presents in this way, in this very specific location, in this very specific way? Does that mean we need to still look as closely at metabolic issues if there's no other corroborating
Yeah.
pain,
Yeah. So,
or not?
yeah. So I think metabolics could still be for sure at play. Typically, what can happen when you look at joints and tendons is that an inflammatory process can begin. And I think that's what typically is happening kind of long term with tendon issues is there ends up being a more constant inflammatory process localized to the tendons at play. And so perhaps that is more of like a long-term effect of metabolic dysregulation if
Hmm.
if that's what the case is. And that's very possible. I mean, the body is so odd but smart in the way that it deals with issues depending on what they are. Basically every kind of pain output that we're experiencing is a protective output to some degree. The problem is when you experience a protective output over and over and over again, and it becomes more chronic and long standing, it's like your brain and body keep using the same software. It's like the program keeps running, even when there might not be a serious issue or an issue at all.
Right. It
So
becomes like hypersensitive to a
it's
specific.
hypersensitivity.
Yeah.
It's hypersensitivity and kind of a central windup, as we sometimes call it, where the nervous system is still behaving as if there is a problem because you basically habituated an inflammatory condition in that body part. And so sometimes my thought is a lot of times when I'm helping people overcome this stuff, sometimes there really isn't even a problem. Like if they've had an insult to the tissue at some point, like there actually has been tissue damage or some localized tissue problem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I feel like we're not even fixing that because it might not need fixing. The tissue might actually be okay, but the person is still experiencing kind of this threat or sensitivity. And so in my mind, it's like we're almost interfering with a program that's still running until we instill enough safety on the brain and nervous system for it to go, oh, we don't need to run this program anymore. We
Right.
don't have to invest in this anymore. So to me, a lot of times that's just this idea of reducing threat.
And this
But
is why.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
well, just to your point there in your question, yes, I still think if it's a localized pain and a person can like point right to it and say this hurts with movement or whatever, that it still could have a metabolic component to it. But usually when people are pointing to a problem and they're able to be that localized about it, a lot of times our localized tools can actually do a lot of good. And that's usually almost a better sign in my eyes sometimes.
Right.
I feel like I can tame that, a little bit quicker with localized tools. Doesn't mean that the localized tools are going to solve everything and that it's all about that, but I find it more challenging when a person is having the floating pain syndrome, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
Things are floating around. It is very hard on the client too. Psychologically, that can
Yeah.
be challenging because their body is constantly grabbing their attention in different body areas. And the basically what happens is, for me, the coach, what I observe is that a person they begin to lose their executive functions that I need them to have to work through the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem with these chronic fuel cases, is that when a person loses their executive function to some degree because pain is a problem or nutrition's a problem or breathing's a problem or all of the above, it gets harder to work with them because you need them to make good decisions and understand why we're following a process. And if they can't because they don't have the cognition for that, and pain can absolutely interfere with our cognition and decision making, it's way harder. So it's when someone points to an elbow and says, ow, can you help me with this? It just always hurts. It's almost like it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not as much chaos underneath it, you know?
So in the world of musicians, there's something called the Alexander technique.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've heard of it.
Yeah. And so I don't know a ton about it, but like if you're a guitarist or you're a pianist, a
Yeah.
lot of what it is about training good postural hygiene, right?
Yeah.
Like holding things in good ways, and then also releasing tension.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having tension in your wrist when you're fretting the fingerboard, like how can you achieve the same motion in a relaxed way? And so it's very much like a matter of like training focus on posture.
Right.
And so that's like a very like intentional
and efficiency, if I understand. Like,
yes.
And we talk about this when we teach people how to do a better job. We just did this actually in our foundations course. We call it the elements of efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
where it's basically just guidelines for like, how do you improve your practice of these exercises so that you're not using too much energy when you don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of reminds me of
That's
those
absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's really useful for a musician if you're doing scales and arpeggios and going up and down,
Totally.
the scales, and to not hold tension and like do it in a way that is fighting against you. If you can just glide across the
Big time. Yeah. And when you're doing something so technical that demands so much, it's like that tension can be very unconscious.
mm-hmm.
It can just develop and you don't realize it until you bring awareness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that practicing anything kind of with those principles is super valuable to learn how to relax more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that, it's like you may be worried about your wrists, but they're like, also, what's your head posture like?
Right.
Also, are you breathing? Don't forget to breathe. A lot of people forget to breathe when they're really concentrating on
Right.
fine motor control, So I was curious if you were familiar and
Yeah. So a long time ago, I had a client who was a conductor, I guess you would say, for the Boston Symphony.
cool.
He told me all about it because he studied it very deeply.
Mm-hmm.
So I never tried it myself, but I was very interested to hear what he had to say, because at the time he was basically saying a lot of what you're teaching me and showing me is reminding me of this technique.
Yeah, isn't that cool? Finding the same nuggets of wisdom
Totally.
dispersed throughout. So kind of as a bridge, maybe we can start talking about some of the common symptoms that you're getting asked about.
Yeah.
Golfer's elbow, tennis
Mhm.
elbow, all the things that make you post an angry face on social media.
Yeah.
But then also like if metabolism, that's a whole podcast, right?
Right.
Assuming that we've tackled that,
Mhm.
what are some of the other things that you might suggest to someone
Mhm.
asking you about these?
Yeah. So the ones that I get questioned about the most are the tennis elbow, the golfer's elbow, jumper's knee, or anything related to the patellar area,
Mm-hmm.
Achilles, right? Achilles tendonitis. Get asked about that one a lot. Those are the most common. Any of the itises,
Mm-hmm.
plantar
Tendonitis,
any
bursitis.
Yep, yeah, exactly. Any of that stuff. I mean, people ask me about those types of things all the time, and again, I mean, I'll be honest with you. When people get told they have one of the itises, um, no matter. Honestly, I don't think it's probably accurate that much. It's probably not that accurate.
Okay.
Right? Because especially when people are going for like a diagnosis, a lot of times they're getting a name for their pain,
Mm-hmm.
and it's risky. It's risky territory, or it's blurry, right? Like, okay, your elbow hurts. You do, it's like, well, you work with your hands a lot, or you do play tennis or whatever it is. Yeah, the tendon seems to be sore. Like, let's call it this. It's really just ends up being a name for pain. At least a great deal of these conditions do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we talk about pain all the time in the podcast and how weird pain is, but you really can't make clear decisions based on pain, because pain is a construct of the brain. It does not live in the tissues. Okay, so any of our listeners who haven't yet heard that, here's your here's your moment. If your elbow hurts, it doesn't mean that you have pain in your elbow, right? The pain is a construct of brain function, and it's a collection of so many different things that then eventually, if threatening enough, your brain decides to create a pain experience. Now, it does not mean that you don't have tissue damage, and it does not mean that tissue damage cannot produce pain, but it does mean that if tissue damage can produce pain, sometimes we can have tissue damage without a pain experience.
Mm.
And this is what you can see in the literature if you just start searching around for information, articles, especially on the spinal cord, just because they've got a lot of research at this point that kind of points to modern pain science being correct when it suggests that you can have all these different issues in your spine that we would associate as being negative and causing symptoms, but yet there's so many asymptomatic people that end up having some sort of deterioration in the spine or bulging disc or nerve root issues or narrowing of canals or whatever the case might be. Right. So pain's weird. Right. And so if your elbow hurts, your knee hurts, and it happens to be a tendon area, we can't just say it must be the tendon. Right. We can't just think that we don't have to, work with the whole system. But yeah, those issues are the ones that I hear about the most when talking to people.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've tried,
mm-hmm.
and that seems to be helpful more often than not, I would say, is just doing a nerve glide through my arm when I have that like carpal tunnel-y thing happening. And so I'll start by doing kind of what you taught me, where it's like I'm making the path of the nerve shorter.
Yep. Yeah. The slacking.
And then slacking, and then sort of getting some movement with one part of it, like my shoulder or something.
Nice.
And then after that, I'll do like the full tension one.
Nice.
And do a glide.
Yeah, probably
that
a
way.
median nerve for your.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Do you have your wrist extended in your palm down and fingers pointed out?
So I will do the second one. I will.
Yeah, exactly. That's the tensioner.
Yeah, the tensioner I will. And I believe we went through this entire process on a previous podcast. As well, all about joint manipulation and nerve glide. So if you want to get into that even more deeply, we have a full episode on that.
Yeah, nice. Let's unpack that a little bit for our listeners. And if you're looking for things to try, right, get your pen and paper. We'll give you some ideas here. So on the topic of neuromechanics, this can be quite a useful tool for tendon pain. It may not be the thing that solves it, but sometimes it does, which means maybe you didn't have as much of a tendon problem as you thought. Maybe the peripheral nerve was actually part of it, but that doesn't really matter. Again, like, I don't think we can be super sure when we're listening to, what diagnosis a person might have or what we think might be the issue. That's why I'm more of a tools guy in taking history and just starting the process.
Yeah.
But if you're going to explore neuromechanics for tendon issues, there are some good ones that we can aim at things like tennis elbow and golfer's elbow. What you want to look for, and you can hit my YouTube page for radial nerve glide. I've got a good long form tutorial on radial nerve glide. And so when you're using a neuromechanic drill to effect a pain complaint that you think is tendon related, one of the things that you would want to do is just do a Google search for the nerves involved with the muscles where you're feeling the issue. Like, I'm trying to think this through as if I don't know any of the stuff that I know.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm a person that's been told they have tennis elbow, and so my extensor muscles on the outside of my forearm up near kind of that bony landmark, that condyle of the elbow, hurt and they're sore. And so if you were to look up those muscles, you would find basically what is the extensor compartment of the forearm. Okay. And if that were an area that you had a concern, you could then look up what peripheral nerves are related to, or another way to say it is what nerve supplies those muscles. And so that would lead you to radial nerve. Okay. And so that can be quite useful when you're working with a tennis elbow or any kind of discomfort there on the outside of the elbow into the forearm. And there's different things you can do to the nerve. The one I have on YouTube for radial nerve glide is a tensioner, and we call that a nerve glide, which basically you put gentle tension on the nerve and then you move a joint area that the nerve crosses, and that's a way that you can mobilize it.
Yeah. I think of it like flossing almost, like you're holding the two sides of the nerve and then you're slowly moving it up and down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, so that would be good there for any issue on the outside. And then for the golfer's elbow, we're moving more to the inside. So, man, this is going to be great, Tony. I just realized I can refer people to this podcast now. After they ask me, I get like 10 questions a day on this.
There you go.
Yeah, nice. It was Tony's idea to do this, by the way. I was like, I'm not talking about this.
I literally saw your post and you were like, I never want to talk about this again. I was like, we should talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah. So we're moving to the inside of the elbow, in which case the muscles there in that inner compartment, we'd be thinking more about the ulnar nerve, which is an interesting one, a little harder to describe on the podcast, but imagine that you were holding a tray of food like up by your head, and your elbow was bent to do it, and your fingertips were pointed back at your own head, holding that imaginary tray. That's the position that you would create with your arm to put tension on the ulnar nerve. There's other little nuances to it that you do with the neck and the shoulder, but that's the idea. So the ulnar nerve tensioners or nerve glides or slacking procedures can be quite useful for that one, and potentially median nerve as well. So those are the three heavy hitters for stuff around that region. We've got the radial nerve glide, we've got the ulnar, and also the median. Okay, and there's another one that might be worth people's time to, and again, you can find at least a demonstration on my YouTube channel, is one for the musculocutaneous nerve. So this is when people are pointing more towards their bicep as where they feel the problem. Yeah, still maybe like right in the elbow joint area, but now we're kind of thinking about those flexor muscles of the elbow up into the bicep itself. And gosh, this is actually can be quite a useful one for anterior shoulder issues, like basically biceps tendonitis, right? A lot of people struggle with that more. Now we're up more by the shoulder, but look for musculocutaneous nerve glide or tensioner or slack. There's lots of things we can do with the nerve, but that is a really powerful one for elbow or shoulder issues involving the flexor muscles.
And just very briefly, right, to explain a little bit of why, we talk about threat all the time, and let's say your brain is perceiving threat around this tendon in a certain area, right? And that's why you perceive maybe some pain there. And so what these slacking and then tensioning drills can do is expose that joint to some mobility, or that tendon or that nerve to some mobility, and then the brain can say, oh, this isn't threatening after all.
Yeah, it's like a form of mapping.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's like a form of mapping and clarifying blurry maps, creating, sensitizing the nerve to, or really, this is the thing. So depending on what we do with the nerve, we might be sensitizing it in terms of stimulating it, or even inhibiting some of the threat or nociception that can be happening. So when you look at the nerve itself, we're talking about peripheral nerves, it's interesting because all nerves have nerve supply, which is interesting to think about. And part of the innervation of the nerve itself, like the trunk of the nerve, is another smaller nerve called the nervi nivorum, which is unique in the fact that it is an unmyelinated, or it's made up of unmyelinated free nerve endings, which means that it basically there's a lot of C fibers, which is a type of nerve ending. This is that type of unmyelinated free nerve ending. C fibers are interesting because they can send information about mechanoreception, so about movement, but they can also send information to the brain about nociception, which is threat or danger signals. Not pain, because there's no nerves for pain. Right? This goes back to that modern pain neuroscience, right? There's no nerves for pain, but we do have nociception, which signal danger, essentially. And so a peripheral nerve has this nervi nivorum innervation, and that means that these C fibers can also produce nociception. And this might make a case for why we can develop an issue like let's call it like a, what is it called there when you're typing at the computer? The one you were describing. Thank you, carpal tunnel. It may make a case for why a peripheral nerve can feel like it is becoming agitated, right? Because now there's a lot of ongoing nociception that's coming from that area. And sometimes we have to turn down that nociception, in which case we might use like the slacking procedure that you were talking about. Other times we might have to sensitize it more. And so putting tension on the nerve might be useful, right? So you kind of got to explore that and see, is one working better than another? Perhaps both of them combined in the same exercise is effective, where you go slacking into tensioning, slacking into tensioning. So there's a lot we can do there. But yeah, think about it in a very basic way. We are improving map clarity when we start to bring nerves through their fullest range of motion. And we are improving their ability to be able to do what they do and transmit information back to the spinal cord and the brain.
Yeah. So anecdotally, when I was exploring this for myself, I went straight to tensioning, and it kind of made it worse.
Okay.
Felt like it was like, ooh, I didn't like that.
Yep.
So then I did the slacking technique, and I noticed now if I do the slacking first, then I can do the tensioning.
Oh, nice.
And it seems to it's like opens the door for that.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It's like first I got to give it some love, and then I can give it some stretch.
Yeah, that slacking procedure is probably just taking tension off of it, or at least it's perceived that way. And then, that becomes an entry point. You can even do the slacking procedure for an extended amount of time, and you can hold it more passively. Like if you rest your arm in the position by propping it up with your other arm, and then just do some breathing and relaxing in the position, sometimes more time in the slack position can then equal a greater effect.
Right? Very cool.
So yeah, this is all the cool stuff we go over in our foundations course for learning how to use neuromechanics. And each nerve you can tension, you can slide, or you can slack. There's different things there, and there's so many little nuances to that work, but it's a wonderful tool. Yeah. Before we move on in categories here, let me just mention this, because I did say that Achilles tendon issues are something people are asking me about a lot. And since we're talking about neuromechanics, you want to write this down if you're hunting for a drill that might be helpful. It is called a sural nerve glide. Sural nerve glide. And
how would you spell sural?
It's SURAL, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. It can be really helpful in Achilles tendon issues. Again, it might not solve it, right? Because there might be more levels we need to work through, but sometimes it does. And so you want to look for that one. You can find it on my YouTube channel, and everything we just talked about applies. You can tension it, slack it, slide it. You might explore it and see which one's best for you. I think I have a long form tutorial on that one as well.
Yeah, very nice. So one of the things, my uncle, he plays guitar, and he complains about tennis elbow. And so one of the things he does is he puts like some kind of band, and I forget exactly where it is, but kind of at the top of his forearm.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Like right below the elbow. And he says that helps some. It can help him get through, a practice session or whatever.
Yep.
What do you think's going on there?
So it could be mapping. Like it could just
Mm-hmm.
be clarifying a map, right? Proprioceptively, it's almost like putting kinesio tape on the body, right? So perhaps that is what's happening for some people. I mean, it really is kind of amazing when you put those types of braces on. Like it can go a long way.
Yeah.
And knowing how well kinesio tape works in certain instances, I get why. I mean, it could provide a sense of stability for the joint just by creating that pressure. There's
Compression.
also there's also another, right, because it is a receptor tool, right? Because when you put something like that on the skin and it's creating skin traction and pressure or whatever the case might be, that's a receptor stimulus, and that kind of tactile stimulation can be useful in decreasing pain. The other thing is when you touch the body, let's say with just like your index finger, right? Let's say someone touches your arm where you're feeling the discomfort. There is a concept called lateral inhibition, which kind of works like this. Like if you touch the skin, basically 360 degrees around that area, and I don't know what the exact radius would be, but it would be pretty localized to where you touch the skin. This idea of lateral inhibition means that anytime you touch the body, there is generally some level of pain inhibition that occurs locally to where the touch is. And that might also describe why something like putting on one of those little proprioceptive, kind of, it's like a ring, it goes around the elbow, like a little strap, could be possibly, that idea could be at play.
So you say like what wires together, fires together.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's like what inhibits nearby also inhibits.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we use that technique. We call it pressure checking, and basically, if you're looking for a starting point on somebody, and you're going to do some form of proprioceptive work or tactile work, you could literally touch body parts and have them retest. Let's say global range of motion, forward bend, trunk rotation, shoulder abduction, all those basics that we often use. And you'll find that when you touch them in a body area and their range of motion improves a lot, what you're actually getting is immediate feedback and clues that working proprioceptively with that body area would probably be a useful thing. And you can even use this to your advantage, and it goes much deeper than that because we can touch the body and test different directions in terms of like pulling the skin, but you can very easily figure out what would be a good idea or what would be a bad idea. One time I used this technique on somebody that had a very, very sensitive lower back issue. They were getting a lot of flare-ups, and I was so glad that I used pressure checking before basically guessing what to do, because I found that when I tractioned the skin on their lower back in a very specific direction, basically their nervous system hated it and their range of motion reduced drastically with all movements. And so it gave me feedback. It was like, oh, let's not move their pelvis today and their lumbar spine. Let's try to find an entry point further away from this until we can kind of calm this threat down. Right. So it's cool how just like one, touch to the body can give you clues like that. But yeah, going back to that strap that you were talking about, perhaps the lateral inhibition comes in there.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. And I'm always telling people, hey, if something like that helps, use it. Right. Use it. It's a good passive stimulus that can be good. One thing that is worth noting for all of these tendon issues that for me is kind of obvious, but I should say it, is just our joint mobility drills. I mean, they can go a long way with tendon issues too. Now, sometimes you have to tweak the way that you're approaching joint mobility, because if you're generating too much tension, that can exacerbate issues. But if you can, again, kind of bring those elements of efficiency into it, make sure you're not generating too much tension, especially in other parts of the body, and you can move a joint through its fullest range of motion, that can be quite useful. And for tendons, you might even explore a tool called a floss band. We've probably mentioned this before in the podcast, but basically a floss band is a piece of latex that is, let's say, 2.5 inches wide, but extremely thin. And they're about 6 feet long, somewhere between 5 and 6 feet long. And you can wrap them around joints and cover the joint and create pressure. And oftentimes that pressure is a very useful stimulus to combine with our joint mobilizations. So that'd be something to consider for our listeners that are looking for tools they can apply.
And kind of like the brace you were just talking about, like you're basically stacking this pressure, this touch, this dermal stimulus, right, with the joint mobilization.
And the floss band is unique because we're able to basically we can work with deeper layers of tissue, basically. Whether that's happening or not, it may be perceived that way because of the pressure. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to move, you're getting a lot of tractioning and moving of underlying tissues, and that compression can give the joint kind of a sense of stability and might be useful for, just mapping like we talked about.
Right. And if you're moving in a way, like if you're supporting the load in the same way that you would when you were experiencing this pain, that makes it more specific to how your nervous system is set up when you're actually moving, right? So we're not just doing this in a passive way. We're also doing it while we're being active.
It's a good point. Active usually always wins. There are times when passive is the entry point, but more often than not, active is always going to win because your brain is learning something versus just applying a passive stimulus. And we typically see those results not last as long, which makes sense, right? But that's a good point. Here's one I want to throw in that's kind of more in my history findings list that's super valuable for people that are experiencing tendon issues on both sides of the body. So that means, hey, I've got tennis elbow, it's on both elbows. I've got patella issues on both knees, Achilles issues, both ankles, right? Those bilateral findings are generally telling us that the problem is more central. So think spinal cord. So this is a really common finding. Now, it's not perfect, but most of the time you will find that the problem, or at least a large part of the problem, is somewhere in the middle of the body. That could be the spinal cord. It could be nerve roots. It could be even a person's vision, which is where things get weird. Like, hey, you have tennis elbow because it's your eyes. Like, yeah. But in our world, you could have bilateral tennis elbow developing because of vision problems. But that's important to know from a history perspective. And, when I hear that, some of the things that I immediately think about are, okay, does this person have any spinal cord mobility issues? And oftentimes they do. So one of the things I see all the time is that our folks who are complaining of bilateral tennis elbow or golfer's elbow have thoracic spine mobility problems. And it's really common, or even cervical spine mobility problems. So maybe we now have to go through some of our joint mobilizations to take care of spinal cord mobility. And that can often be really, really useful. There could be like nerve root issues there at the spinal cord, and even what we call DTRs, deep tendon reflex issues, which is actually like the reflex of the tendon itself. So you know how when you were a kid, you went to the doctor's, your knee was on the table, your leg's on the table, and the doctor takes the tendon hammer and goes boink right off your, tendon, and your leg jumps off the table.
That was always so fun. I don't know
why. Yeah. That is what I'm talking about with deep tendon reflex. Mm-hmm. And that is important. That's kind of like it's like the muscle stretch reflex, basically. And sometimes if people have had issues over time with peripheral nerves or the spinal cord, maybe they've even had a spinal cord injury at some point, a bulging disc, something along those lines, you can actually lose deep tendon reflexes, in which case those tendons are not responding correctly anymore. So you might tap them with the hammer, and yes, these tendons all the tendons that we're talking about have these reflexes. It's not just at the knee. So you can test tendons at the elbow, at the forearm. We can do the same for the hamstrings and the Achilles. And when you tap the tendon with the hammer, you should get a response from that, a reflexive response where there's like a twitch. Okay. And you can even evaluate it deeper. And by looking at the movement that happens after the twitch, whether or not it's too much or too little, we can kind of grade those responses, because you can tap a tendon and let's say you see that knee jerk happen, and then the leg sort of keeps swinging as it slows down, and maybe it swings 5 times before it actually comes to a stop. You might look at that as actually a suboptimal response for the tendon reflex, where there's too much movement and not enough of the movement was inhibited on time.
Mm-hmm.
And we might even consider that more of a cerebellar issue, because the cerebellum is one of its primary jobs is to stop unwanted movements and inhibit them. Or you can maybe tap the tendon and nothing happens. It's non-responsive. And I see this way more than you would think. And a lot of times, yeah, it's a spinal cord history. Most of the time, I would say. Anyways, testing those is actually not that difficult, especially if you have a tendon hammer, but I actually teach my clients how to do it themselves. And I'll say, hey, go grab a butter knife from your kitchen. We'll turn the butter knife around. It's got just enough weight, and you can actually just Google up deep tendon reflexes on YouTube, and you'll see like physicians and stuff demonstrating this and teaching like medical, students. And it's not a hard thing to do necessarily once you figure out how to relax your limb enough. But when someone else can do it for you, it's better and it's easier. But the point I'm trying to make is sometimes people with bilateral tendon issues actually have deep tendon reflexes that aren't working too.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be problematic. And you can restore those reflexes. I've done it many times now with clients. And literally just by tapping the tendon repetitively as part of a stack for other exercises, you can get really far doing that. So in other words, let's say you have a patellar tendonitis. Go sit down in a chair, relax your leg, take a butter knife, and gently start tapping the tendon. Even if you don't get a response, because like I said, it can be hard to relax your leg enough when you're doing this on yourself. Even if you don't get a response, you can immediately retest afterwards and see if it was useful after you tap the tendon, let's say 20 times. Sometimes that can be a very useful training stimulus. And if nothing happens, you might in fact be discovering that you don't have the reflex, which would be problematic, right?
Right.
And if you do have the reflex, great, that's good news. You can still tap the tendon and retest it and see if it's a useful training stimulus. But a lot of times when we see this, we have to find ways to bring the reflex back. And our nerve glides are actually a way that we have been successful with that too, as well as just tapping the tendon. And that can go a long way for tendon problems, because here's the thing, when those reflexes aren't working, it's as if your shocks are not working.
Mm-hmm.
Because that reflex that happens helps us with fast movement. It helps us like decelerate or buffer movement that's fast. Think like plyometric type activity. So, restoring that is quite important. I've had to do that a number of times with people, and it's been quite important for them to get back into like more athletic movement without pain.
Yeah. So often, the pain is like a clue, but it's not the whole mystery. And so you're taking these histories and you're doing these assessments and you're trying to figure out, okay, is it bilateral? Is it floating? Is it very specific
Right.
to that one joint? And you're using those clues and applied neurology, right, to find these solutions. And so for one person, it might be how they're breathing. And for someone else, it might be their reflex response needs to be trained. Right. And yeah, really, really fascinating.
So something worth saying is just thinking about general conditioning, right? Because we said how some of these overuse injuries can actually be from disuse. It's just that you got a name put on your pain based on the body part and what hurts when you touch it. But we can still have those issues from disuse. And sometimes we are active, right? But maybe we don't have the right type of conditioning, and our body is becoming deficient in certain types of stimulus. And that happens, especially when you're in pain. You stop doing plyometric type activity, right? So you have to think about kind of the receptor specific nature of a tendon itself as being involved in more plyometric type things or more ballistic type movement and being able to buffer and transmit energy through the body. And if you're not moving like that anymore, which many of us don't accidentally, okay, that can be problematic long term because now your tendons are losing their elasticity, right? Which is what they're supposed to be able to do and behave like. So sometimes from a general specific standpoint, we've got to kind of evaluate and go, well, you might be active. Okay, that's good. But you might be deficient in certain types of movement, right? And so that's just another, it keeps building a case for why it's important to move athletically and have some sort of speed variability in your fitness regimen so that you're not always doing things slow, right? We gotta move athletically to some degree, and for the general population, it doesn't have to be like a complete makeover of your programming. But like, hey, when's the last time you jumped rope? Like stuff like that. When's the last time you actually did some build-up sprints? When's the last time you did something more plyometric where you've been doing push-ups for 15 years, but instead of doing, 3 sets of 10, why don't we do them at different speeds? Or how about a plyometric type push-up, where you're actually like exploding, right? Even if you can only do one. Yeah, even if you only do one. I do stuff like that a lot where I'm like, all right, instead of 10, I'm going to do 10 sets of one, but I'm going to move with the intent of being fast. And that's a totally different training stimulus. And you'll feel that for sure that it's different because the next day you're like, whoa, it's interesting. I don't feel like I did the same volume that I normally do when I'm strength training and kind of grinding through movements, but just that fast nature to the few reps that I did actually totally taxed me in a different way.
One of the things that I've sort of come to think about in terms of programming is that the best program is the one that you will do, right? But the most optimal next program is the one that has all the stuff that you never do.
Right.
And so it's like if you're always sprinting and you're always doing that, like maybe doing something at a slower pace, more strength-based would be a real tonic for you. Like it would really make your body feel good. And if you're always lifting really heavy and slow, maybe doing plyometrics and more explosive work at a lighter weight would feel really good for you. It's sort of like the antidote for whatever you've come to do is the thing that you're avoiding. And so if that means you're not doing anything, well, then most programs are going to be something good for you, right?
Right. It's amazing how you can lose it's amazing how you can accidentally lose these kinds of things in your movement. I was just thinking about this time I was over a friend's house not long ago, and we ended up going into his basement. He was looking for something that he was going to let me borrow, and he had a punching bag down there, like a heavy bag. And like when I see a heavy bag, like I have to wind up and just hammer it with a kick. I love to kick, right?
Nice.
And I grew up kicking when I was little. I was Taekwondo, and then like I've done some kickboxing just for fun. Like especially during COVID times, when our jujitsu schedule was altered, they were kind of like, you know how weird it was during that time. Like they were basically like, okay, no jujitsu, but we'll just shift to like self-defense and kickboxing. So then I was doing some of that. Anyways, the point is I love to kick, and I grew up doing it all the time when I was in Taekwondo, but I don't get to do that anymore. And I wound up and hammered the heavy bag with this kick, and it was like bone rattling for me. And I was like, whoa, it feels good. It also kind of felt bad. Because I wasn't that used to it. Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, like max speed, it's so different, that ballistic nature of throwing that kind of, momentum into a movement and then having an impact. And, we take that kind of thing for granted. The same goes for sprinting, right? You could accidentally forget to sprint for 30 years. People do it all the time. People do it all the time. I mean, you could just go to the grocery store and point at most adults, and they probably haven't run a sprint since high school. and that means you're incredibly deficient in a certain receptor stimulus. And that is why sometimes when you become deficient like that, eventually your brain just tags certain proprioceptive input as threatening because you're just not doing it anymore. And it's not as welcomed, if you know what I mean, because those types of things carry a little bit higher risk, right? Faster movements, more plyometric kind of, input. And yeah, it's another reason why we got to be careful that we don't get deficient in certain things with movement.
That's right. And I would wager that a larger percentage of people who are messaging you about tennis elbow or golfer's elbow or whatever it is
Yep.
are also not training as much. I would just make that wager.
Absolutely. Some of them are probably honestly not exercising at all, at least much. A lot of the folks I've talked to kind of fall into the category of like, they tell me, well, they're an active individual, but there's no kind of framework to their fitness. Fitness for them is just sort of making sure they're having an active lifestyle, which is good.
It's great, yeah.
But it's very easy to miss out on these other types of movement that you need. And, the use it or lose it principle is a real. If that's the only neurology you ever learned, that's good. That's good neurology. The use it or lose it principle is real. And so we have to keep exposing ourselves to a variety of movement, right? Enough that our brain decides it's worthy to keep investing energy resources into keeping these tissues alive and healthy.
Did you have any other nuggets of wisdom for the...
I'm just looking at my bullets here that I wanted to hit, and there's two things here that I think I could talk about pretty quickly. And this is more for people who have gone through our courses and our students who are kind of really familiar with the terminology. PMRF, pontomedullary reticular formation. All right. That's when we start talking about the brainstem and tendon issues. You could also kind of fit into this PMRF when there's a PMRF issue, sometimes because of I guess we would say, changes in muscle tone that happen with the PMRF because it's largely involved in helping to calibrate muscle tone. You could meet an individual who tells you they have like a one-sided pain history where, let's say, a lot of their tendon complaints are on one side of the body. That might make you think of the PMRF, and we've got specific, training that we can do to start to go after that. You could also see bilateral tendon issues that are being more mediated by a bilateral PMRF pattern. So these are just things to keep in mind. There's no absolutes here, but yeah, remember the brainstem is going to be big for setting the tone for muscles, and people that have PMRF issues often will have more like repetitive kind of overuse type strain injuries on the side that they have the PMRF dysfunction.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And the last one here that I wanted to at least mention, because sometimes people are in a situation where like all these training ideas are great, but they're just in too much pain right now to kind of progress into them. And it can be hard to find a entry point, especially with, really significant pain. And, we didn't even get into it, but like stress fractures are an overuse type injury too. Right. And so people who are dealing with stress fractures may have to have a different game plan at first, right, with what they're doing. But I wanted to mention the idea of aquatic exercise for those people, because aquatic exercise is amazing in some instances and often almost never fails as an entry point when a person is in pain and they can't do as much weight bearing without risk and without increasing pain. So you can go exercise in the pool, in the swimming pool, and you could go shallow end, you can go deep end. My background comes from the Burdenko method, which is a land and a water technique for just general conditioning and also rehab. So one of the things that we do in the Burdenko method that was taught to me is deep water exercise, where you wear flotation around your waist. And sometimes you have other tools like foam barbells and stuff that also give buoyancy. And it's really cool because you can go into the deep water and you can exercise in many cases in the vertical position, which is nice. And you can go through different mobility exercises. You can do a lot with that buoyancy attached to you. And it's just a nice feeling. It's a great way to do like whole body exercise, usually without exacerbating symptoms, because the water is such a unique medium to move in. As you're moving your body through the water, you're getting a little bit of resistance, which is useful, but you're also getting assistance from the water and also support, because you've got the pressure against your body from the water coming from all directions. Some even say you've got good kind of axial loading, like traction happening through the spine when you exercise in a vertical position in the water, because you have buoyancy kind of meeting gravity. You're not like weightless per se. Gravity still exists, but you have buoyancy. And especially when you kind of go up and down in the deep water, you're getting this kind of tractioning effect. It can be quite good for a lot of people. I don't think it's it's not the end all be all in terms of all your training has to be done in the water. I look at it as more of an entry point when you're dealing with a pain issue, so that you don't have to give up moving. You can still move, and therefore that's super valuable versus, hey, people are told all the time, if you get a diagnosis of some sort of overuse, repetitive motion type injury, what does the doctor tell you? All right, stop moving.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Take some ibuprofen. Let's immobilize you and let's let it heal. Well, let what heal? There might not be any healing that needs to take place, right? It's just there's so many factors that go into it. Why would you not want to move? This is where the water comes in, right? Now you can move. You can do it safely. You can do it with support. You can do it even with resistance, right? The water offers all those unique things. So I always try to mention it occasionally because for some specific issues, it can be fantastic.
Very nice. So yeah, a lot for people to chew on, and a lot of I think great leads if someone is dealing with this themselves, or if they have a client. You've got some leads that you can go chase down and see if you can figure out,
for sure,
what it is that's actually causing the pain, and therefore what can you do to make it better.
For sure. It's funny when we talk about like these specific kinds of issues, and I start thinking about the different tools that we could use to affect them. It's kind of funny for me because as I think through it, a lot of times it ends up being the same list for everything.
Sure.
And I'm like, interesting. I'm glad, because that means I found really useful tools. But it's like if you just practice the basics and you do it with, consistency and intent, you're going to hear me repeat myself over and over again that joint mobility for the whole body is amazing. And it's going to solve a lot of your issues. And then add speed variability to your joint mobility, and that's going to solve more issues. And get involved in learning the neuromechanics that we teach, so you can do mobility for your nerves and throw in a breathing exercise. And, there's it's like the same repetitive thing over and over. And yeah, we might tweak it. And you might find that certain things are higher payoff than other things. And that's why we encourage people to keep assessing and reassessing, so that you don't have to take my word for it or feel like you have to do everything. You can just kind of assess, reassess, find the exercises that are helping you for your goal, and then start there. That's the key. Mm-hmm. All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you'll head over to the YouTube channel and check some of this stuff out. If you haven't done so yet, I've got a lot of long form tutorials over there, and I'm shooting more all the time, and they can help you get started on some of these drills. And remember, you can still even watch my free Neuro Masterclass. All right, that's available right now, and that's where you can learn the assessment process that I'm always talking about. So if you need to either refresh on that, or you haven't heard about it yet, watch the free masterclass. You'll pick up some neat neuro tools there too. But the whole point of that masterclass is to teach people how to assess and reassess, so that you can begin the process, right? Because in the end, to me, it's like, what's more important than even the exercises is actually the process, so that you can make good decisions as you move through it. That's typically in the long term what, gets a person from where they are now to, having success with overcoming some kind of pain issue. So I hope you do that. If you guys would be so kind to hit us up with a review on the podcast, that really helps. Thank you all to you guys who have left a review. It means a lot to us, and thanks for your support on the podcast. Thanks for listening today, and we'll be back soon.